Oh, hi.
Oh, thank God. I'm so sorry about
I'm so
everything that went on
glad.
yesterday.
When I got on this Zoom and you weren't there, I thought, oh no, nothing.
Hopefully, my other group mates will join soon. Let me go ahead and
Tell
get
me how to say your name. Are you Ania or Anaya?
Anaya.
Anaya.
And
Beautiful.
then, how would you pronounce your name?
Joelle,
Okay, Joelle. All right, let me go ahead and get the
are you
questions.
now? You're not loud enough. Let me
Oh, I'm
try
not?
here.
Let's see.
Maybe you're too far from the microphone.
Um,
Now I hear you perfectly. That was the
okay.
problem.
I think I just had to move it a little closer. Okay, let me go ahead and let my group mates know, 'cause they should already be
Alexis is
here.
here. Hi, Alexis. Oops, I think she can't hear us.
Participants. Okay,
And she's on
Alexis
YouTube.
here.
She's not both her video and
Okay.
hi,
Everybody.
Kimberlyn. Hi, Alexis. We got you there.
Yes.
All right, let me go ahead and get the questions.
Kimberlyn, I only see the top of your face. Better. Great.
Okay.
How many of you are composers?
None of us, but we are still interested in the music world.
And what's your relationship to music?
I was actually in band for pretty much all of middle school and high school.
Oh,
So
wonderful. What did you play?
I was a percussionist.
Oh, how wonderful. And you stopped?
Unfortunately, yeah.
What are
I
you
went
majoring
back
in?
into it.
What are you majoring?
I'm majoring in studio arts.
Oh, so you're a very creative person. You just focused in a different place.
Yeah.
And what about Alexis? I'm going in the order in which people appeared.
Mhm. I've never played an instrument. I've never been in band or anything. I've just always been really connected to music for some reason. I don't know if it's because my parents have always played music in the house growing up, but I'm just really connected to music. I'm also a dancer. So
Oh, that's a real connection to music. Yeah.
yeah, so music is like a real like part of me, I feel like. And my major is actually sociology, so it has nothing to do with this class, but it was offered in the courses that I needed for my credits, and I just thought it would be a perfect class for me to take.
What is this class?
This is a music class,
It is a music class.
Women in music. So we
women in
studied
music,
the
yeah.
history.
And Kimberlyn, what's your connection to, how did you get to this project? How did you get to the class and so on?
I need it for my general requirement, so I thought
I
this
can't
class.
hear you.
That I took it as my general requirement class.
I still can't hear you. Either you're too far from the microphone or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I took it as a general requirement, and I thought it would be really interesting. And I took band in middle school, so I played the flute.
And do you still play the flute?
Not anymore.
Ah, okay. All right. So basically, this is not going to be too much about music itself.
A little bit. Some of
Okay.
the questions are, but it doesn't delve too deep
I
into them.
don't have the questions in front of me because I'm just going to respond to you.
Okay. So I'll go ahead with my questions. So my first question is, would
Oh,
you?
wait, I have another question.
Yeah.
Can I get a copy of this? It says it's recording. Can
Oh,
you
of
send me a
course.
copy of the recording?
Of course. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
So then the first question I have is, would you say that the composer world is broadening in regards to female identifying composers receiving more recognition?
Ask me that question again.
Would you say that the composer world is broadening in regards to female identifying composers receiving more recognition?
You mean, is it better than it has been?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. It's definitely better than it has been.
And then my second question, it was, I noticed that you won a Brio Award in 2017. And do you happen to remember which work samples you submitted and why you chose them?
If you will let me, I will look up my application so I can, hold on, I'm gonna be like looking in my computer. I know I have this file. Let's see. Documents. Yeah. Okay, let's see what I sent them. I have found this. Okay. I sent them 2 pieces, which is what they wanted. And where are you? Let me go back to you. And I sent them a piano piece that was commissioned by, this is interesting about women in music, by a wonderful Mexican pianist,
Mhm.
Ana Cervantes. And she had commissioned a bunch of composers for a project about Latin American women. And I thought a lot about what subject matter I would look at. And a Latin American woman that has always, well, she's not exactly Latin American, is this poor woman, Carlotta, who
Mhm.
was for a couple of years the Empress of Mexico, but she was not Mexican.
Mm.
This was it was, did you expect such a long thing? I didn't write the piece about this, by the way. But it's such a good story. Her husband, Maximilian, was a nephew of Napoleon when Napoleon was the emperor of France and a good piece of Europe. And Napoleon thought, Mexico, who cares what happens there? I'll send them my sort of retarded nephew. So he sent them this nephew who was sort of, both Maximilian and Carlotta were like clueless about colonialism. So they thought the Mexicans loved them. The Mexicans hated them. I mean, it was completely, a weird exploitation thing. And it was also like they had no concept of what the culture of Mexico was about. And Mexico is a very interesting culture. So this is the most interesting thing. So Maximilian went traveling around Mexico trying to persuade them that he and Carlotta were like there for their benefit. They were actually sincere, but the truth is it was a terrible idea for them to be there or for France to take over Mexico. The whole thing was just totally misguided and terrible. So they killed him. And Carlotta didn't know he was killed, but she knew it was dangerous. So because don't forget, they had no phones, they had no email, they had like no way to reach each other. So when he's traveling around Mexico, I don't know how good the mail was there. It wasn't great here even then, in the early 19th century. So she decided to go by ship to France to plead with Napoleon to recall them. She never believed her husband had died. She went crazy. She lost her mind and she became like a mad woman. Now, I didn't write this as a piece because it would be too complicated a story to write as anything other than an opera. I mean, it's a really dramatic story and you need crowds and she wanted piano pieces. So, but I got interested in mad women. I have an interest in mad women. And so there's this folk song that's called La Llorona, and it also has to do with colonialism in Mexico. The song is about, it's a ditty like song. I'm going to sing it for you. I'm sorry this is being recorded, but here we go. Da 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 dee da da dee da 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 dee da da dee da da dee. It's a very popular folk song in Latin America. And La Llorona means the woman who cries. So this was a young woman And she fell in love with a man who was basically a conquistador. This is 100, 200 years before the thing with France. This was a thing with Spain. It's the same principle. So she falls in love with him and they get married and they have 2 children. And she thinks they're very happy, but he goes back to Spain for like work. He's an ambassador of some kind or a governor. So I don't remember what his rank was. It's not important to the story. So he goes back to Spain and she waits for him. She waits for him. She takes care of the children and she assumes he's coming back. Now, Mexico, I have had interesting experiences with it in Mexico. It's very, very sunny. It has really, unless you know how to work the system, which most Americans who go there do, but many, just like impoverished people here, impoverished people in Mexico also don't know how to work the healthcare system. And so between the terrible burning sun, which is also beautiful, but it's a burning sun, and the lack of healthcare, I remember being there when I was like, I was 40. And I was there. By the way, you know how old I am, right?
No, I do not.
I'm 76.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Look great.
I love you, Alexis. Anyway, I was 40. And there was a woman selling shawls on the street. And we had a talk. And she was 30. But she looked older than I look now. Because she was completely wizened from the sun and from working hard on the street all day, and God knows how many children she had, it was a much rougher life. So going back to La Llorona. So La Llorona is, she's the crying woman. And the reason she's the crying woman is there she is and a riverbank washing her clothes in the river and taking care of her children in the river. And he comes in a beautiful coach. He's returned. And he doesn't recognize her because she has become an old woman. And she looks in the coach. And there his young blonde wife from Spain. And she also goes crazy. And she drowns both her children. This is like from the Medea myth, right? But it's Mexico. She drowns her children. And then she realizes what she's done. And she's so horrified that to this day you can hear her crying along the riverbanks in Mexico. So it's a really dramatic story, but it's a personal story. So it's easier than the Carlotta story to write as a piano piece. And so I wrote this piano piece, which is now, you can see this piano piece and hear it all over the place. It's been recorded a whole bunch of times. It's about madness and how her madness goes in and out. Like sometimes she just sings the song, and sometimes the song is like very distorted, very slow, very fast, very jumpy, all kinds of ways. And of course, it gives the pianist a lot of interesting ways to play to do this. So that was one of the songs I sent to them. That was the piano piece I sent to them. The other piece I sent to them is a choral piece, an unaccompanied choral piece in English. And the name of the piece is Therefore. And I think I should read you the text. Is that okay with you? I read you the poem?
Yes.
Hold on, let me find it. Let me see if I can find the text, if I wrote it in here, if it's in the piece. It's in the piece, but it's very tiny. Very, very tiny. So let me try to enlarge it and read it to you. Because I think it's a wonderful message, especially for us now. Let me do this. Nothing. Let me make this smaller as a thing so I can see you guys. Yes, you beautiful girls. Am I allowed to call people girls?
Yes.
No, I mean, everything is so changed now.
Right.
I don't mean to insult anybody. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to find it in print so I don't have to close the close because you are. Now I can't find it. There's another story. got it. Of course, in the last place I looked. But here it is. So I'm going to read you the words, which are not mine. They're by a poet called William Dickey. Nothing exists that is not marred. Therefore, we are obliged to imagine how things might be. The sea at its green uttermost, the shore white to exaggeration, white before it was checked and clouded by the spent debris. Nothing exists that does not end. And so to knowledge, we must deliberately be untrue. You, murmuring that you will not go when you will go, promising to do always what you cannot do, hold the sun steady and the sky new. No one exists who can be loved the same by day as by dark. It is that sleeping place, lame, we attempt to follow into and cannot trace, that makes us lie, saying we know his face, as if we knew even half of his true name. Do you want me to play you this? Or you can find it also. It's, well, I'll find it for you. Again, I'm gonna have to look here to, oops, why is this not happening? It's doing funny things. Let me move up here. This is part of a series of things for small choral group called Spiritual Speculations. And here it is. It's called Therefore. And I think I have a nice recording of it somewhere. Here. Okay.
I think the audio might be cutting out for the song.
Okay, so let's stop it. What interested me here was that this is a very, one of the things that very interested me about music is that it can say emotional things that are complicated. So that, not simple. So while this poem says everything is marred, but we can work on it, we can do it, and we have to do, but there's this refrain that goes, all the way through it, because you may be saying a very sad, a very brave thing, but there's a part of you that's saying, as it in the poem, no, I don't want it to be that way. So that was the second piece I sent to the Brio people. And I also think that the message is true. The world is really screwed up now.
Mhm.
But it's like incumbent upon us, whether we're students or young people or artists, it's incumbent upon us to make it as good as we can, to do something to make it better. Even though we know it's very imperfect and a lot of things are sort of permanently messed up, we have to do whatever we can to make it a better world.
I like that.
Thank you, Alexis. So that was the long answer to that question.
No worries. Let's see. What's another good question?
So in your project for this class, all you have to do is show them this, right? You don't have to write about it.
We have to do like a short sort of summary about it.
Okay, I'd love to see those too. That would be wonderful.
Of course.
Thank you. So what's your next question, Anaya?
Let's see. Kimberlyn, did you want to do your questions next?
Yes.
Oh, you all have different questions.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just reading from the list.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Barely.
Okay, want to make sure. Okay, my question is, when did you first start composing, and who or what influenced and inspired you?
When I first started, what influenced me and inspired me, or now what influences me, or all along what influenced and inspired
All of it.
me? It's going to be another long question. When I was a little girl, I had a grandmother who had this thing. She felt that all her children and all her grandchildren should read before they were 3, and including reading music. So we all did that. And it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, I think if one of us had been unable to do it, it would have been a terrible thing because you would have felt like a pariah. But since we all, it turned out, were able to do it, it was good. And it was very good for me because when I was 5 years old, we moved to Africa. Yeah, I know, isn't that weird? So we moved to Africa for 5 years. During this time, and we moved, this is why I hate colonialism, I think. We moved to a French colony. There still were colonies when I was a little girl. So we lived in this French colony. And let me tell you, the French, it's like the Mexican story of Carlotta. The French, like the English, when they had colonies, they would just exploit the natural resources of everything. But the French, from the time of Napoleon, which is why the Carlotta story interests me, in addition to being interested in mad women, the French don't just exploit people. They also try to wipe out the host culture. Like, we were not allowed to speak Arabic. We were not allowed. All schools were in French, period. All public things were in French, period. All signs were in the Roman alphabet, not in the Arabic script. And but there was also the beginning of the anti-colonial wars against France, which is really a good thing. And during that time, there were a lot of dangers in the street, as you could imagine. So mostly we were home, the schools were closed, everything was very, very closed down. It was sort of like the pandemic without a disease. And what was good was I was by then a fluent reader, and I could read music fluently. And so I would play a lot of music. I mean, on the piano and the violin. When I came back, I'm still answering your question, Kimberlyn. It takes a really long time. You asked a very good question.
No worries.
So, and at the time, the music I had with me was very conventional music, wonderful music, but you know, printed music we had brought from America. And whatever I could get from France, which was not so easy. When we came back, of course, and I went to school, you know, when you're 10 years old and you go to an American school for the first time, it's really weird. Like, you notice things that regular kids don't notice. Like, how come the factories, the prisons, and the schools all have the same architecture? Like, how come? That's true. You know, and then when I first saw Girl Scouts in uniform, I thought, shit, it's a paramilitary thing, which of course it is. You know, it was like, I was suddenly in this environment that had never been explained to me, because of course for my parents, there was nothing to explain. But for me, it was really a shocking thing. And I didn't really know how to play with friends. So, and the people I knew, they didn't play like ordinary combinations of instruments, because this is New York City, where until you're in high school, they don't have, there's one band in the whole city, basically, or 3, and there's one orchestra, and you have to be like a virtuoso to be in it. You know, it's like, so they don't teach you instruments in schools. Even then they did, but now especially, they don't do any. Anyway, so I had friends who played like weird combinations of things, like the harmonica, the violin, the cello, the banjo. You know, things that there's no music for that. So that was how I began to really compose. And at the same time, and it was like playing around, I didn't have any rules. Although at the same time, I was also studying the violin at Juilliard. So I also knew theory because they made you take theory classes, but I didn't understand it as like instructions of how you're supposed to write. I thought it was just like an interesting set of observations about music, which is actually what it is. But the two things work very well together. I still never called this composing, Kimberly. I never considered it composing. And part of this goes back to Anaya's first question about women composers. I never heard of any women composers. I just never heard of them. 70 years ago or 60 years ago, we didn't know them. And in fact, in my generation, the women composers in the United States, we all know each other. There are so few of us that we all know each other. Now, in your generation, there's a lot of women. It's perfectly okay. It's the norm. Men and women compose, and people of all other chosen genders compose, all kinds of people compose. There doesn't seem to be a gender preference among living composers that I am experiencing. So by the time I got to college, I still didn't see myself as composing, even though I was constantly writing music. And I was studying piano at college. And I sounded like a really good instrumentalist because I was very musical, but I had horrible technique because I'd spent these 5 years in Africa just playing around. So I didn't play right. And my teachers always said, well, you have to go back to the beginning. And of course I was young and I was defiant. And I thought, why should I go back to the beginning? I already sound great. My last piano teacher, in fact, said to me in graduate school, he said to me, I would never have taken you on as a student if I understood that you played so badly. You just sound so good. And at that point, I had some really severe hand injuries from the way I was playing. So what happened in college was I had this fight with my piano teacher. She refused to teach me. And I hated her. So it was fine with me. But I was playing chamber music with the faculty. This had been something I was doing in high school also, but in high school, it was no one prized doing it. But in college, yes. If you were playing chamber music with the faculty, they figured you were good. So there was a man who was the head of the composition department, who was the clarinetist. And I was playing with him and he said, I hear you're not studying piano next year. And I said, yeah. He said, you should study composition. I said, I don't know anything about composition. And he said something that really shocked me. I mean, you have to understand, this shocked me. I'm going to say something to you that isn't going to shock you because you know the end of the story. But he said to me, you write all the music for the theater department and the dance department. You're a composer. And it was shocking. I thought I was just playing around with music. Now, the rest of your question, Kimberlyn, who influenced me? Many people influenced me. I mean, we're talking about Bach and Schubert and Brahms, who are very important to me, and Bartok, but also colleagues' music is important to me. Folk music, and the folk music, I think this is very important because I lived in such a different place in childhood. And then in my adulthood, I lived in Mexico for a while and so on. So these things, I'm very interested in culture that grows out of the consciousness of people. Of a culture of people, of a group of people. I'm very interested in how that kind of folk music grows up and expresses things that are important to a whole people, even things they don't know that are important to them. You know what I mean? Like the woman who cries, and wherever you walk along a river, you hear the crying. You know, this stuff is very meaningful to me. So also I'm very interested in folkloric music like that. Did that answer your question, Kimberlyn?
Yes, it did a lot. Okay.
Good. Are we gonna end sooner or are we gonna keep going? Because I'm ready to keep going.
I have another question.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
And then I hope Alexis has.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so my other question is, what do you usually start with when composing?
What do I usually play with?
What do you usually start with? Yeah, when
What do I
composing.
usually start with? This is New York, so we have sirens, so I'm not gonna answer until he leaves, right? It's probably a fire. So, start with. At this point in my life, well, always, there's two kinds of music that I write, that I think of as two different ways of starting. One is that I like writing small pieces for my own, they're like a journal. Well, I'm going to tell you this story. The big pieces I write are all commissions. And why is that? Because I don't want, I'm a slow composer and very careful. And I don't want to spend like years or months of my life on something that I will never hear. I just don't want to do that. It's very frustrating and it's upsetting and I don't grow from it. So if a piece is commissioned, you know it will be performed by those people who are paying you to write it. You know, you don't have to go look for performers, you don't have to shop the piece around, it's going to get done. And then there are the small pieces, often like solo works or songs that I just write because I like writing them. Now, I was once and at the time that I'm talking about, which is maybe up to about 20 years ago, songs were like, people looked at songs like these little things that women write. So I never talked about them. But I wrote them because I liked them, because if worse came to worse, I could perform them myself, or at least play them myself. I knew what they sounded like, and I knew what they felt like. Then I was at an artist colony, a pretty famous one, Yaddo, if you know the name, Yaddo. All of you who are painters, dancers, you should know that name. I was at this artist colony, and there was a painter there. And he painted these very, very large paintings and murals, like huge. And he had an open studio one night, and he had, you know, these pads they sell, these big pads. And he had this big pad, and he had divided it up into squares, like squares that were probably 6-inch square. And every night he would paint a little 6-inch square. And he said, this is my journal. And I realized my songs and my little pieces, they were my journal. And I stopped being ashamed of them. And suddenly everybody was playing them and singing them because they were a secret before. But, you know, they became not a secret. I'm answering the what do I start with it? So it depends. If it's something from my journal, I often start with like some feeling I had that day, and either a poem that works with that, or just a sonority that works with that, or something. Well, if it's a commissioned work, the first thing is, what are the instruments? Because they tell me that. How long is it going to be? Where is it going to be performed? How is it going to be performed? And what level are the performers? For example, I had this really wonderful commission. This was a delight, but for a studio at a wonderful young women's college, a beautiful college. It's not the young college, it's young women. And they had a piano studio with 12 piano students. They wanted a piece that everybody could play. So I know, doesn't it sound crazy to you? So I wrote a 4-movement piece, and each movement had like 4 hands. So each one was a piano duet. But you can play the piece, which is now played by professional pianists, as one big 4-movement work. But for these young women, it was like there is a medium hard piece for 2 people, and then a really easy piece for two people, and then a kind of hard piece, and then a very hard piece, so that everybody in the class had a role in this who wanted it. Only 8 people wanted to do it, but it was really fun to write. And then you could divide it up further so that it's like each of these had like 2 players with 4 hands, right? But you could also have 4 players with 4 hands, like everybody playing 1 hand. So it was really a delight. But sometimes the inspiration often comes from like who is going to play this and what's the purpose of the piece. I just finished a piece about women's suffrage, which was commissioned by National Endowment for the Humanities, not for the arts, but for the humanities. And it was commissioned for a group with strange instruments like flute, harp, violin, viola, and cello. Unfortunately, there's no one else who plays this, but they played this piece so many times because it's part of the grant that it's fine. It's even on YouTube, which is really nice. And I'm about to send it to Brio, by the way, because your question about Brio. So, but I'm tired of like the famous women and women's suffrage. And I discovered that, they didn't have email either. And they didn't have telephones in the middle of the 19th century. They didn't have this stuff. But all their letters about abolition, because these people were all involved in women's suffrage and abolition and in, believe it or not, temperance. So all their letters are in the New York Public Library and in the Library of Congress. And you can get them on your computer. I mean, you just have to look. It's not like you have to go to Washington or New York. They're all online. So it was great during the pandemic because I could read their letters and find out who they were. Like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, we found her letters to her grandchildren when she talks to them about their pony and what they should feed the pony and how he had to work on his spelling. And she was just a granny. And when we performed the piece at Woodlawn Cemetery where she's buried, her great-great-grandchildren came. Wow. It was fantastic. So does this answer your question about inspiration?
Yes.
Good. Okay, Alexis, are we on?
Yes, we're on. My first question is, what is your method or process when it comes to writing music and presenting your final product?
It's very private for me. And the reason it's very private for me, and the reason I think I'm a composer and not a writer, I write well, but I never wanted to write so well I could be a writer. Because my mother was very intrusive. And music is in code. She could never quote my music back to me. Never. In fact, when I was in graduate school, one of the most useful things for me was learning how to speak about my music and other music. And I became really good at it so that I was hired for 30 years by the New York Philharmonic to talk about what people were going to hear. Yeah, I became really good at it. I really got into it, like talking about what music meant and what a piece was about and what made somebody write that piece and why some people hate that piece. And why some people like to play that piece and why some people hate to play that piece. It's very interesting to me. And when I was doing this at the Philharmonic for all those decades, I loved it. And I think the reason that they loved it was not just because I could actually talk about things as though I knew them, because I would research them, but because I always felt that I was inviting people into this like private world that I loved so much. And it was like a very personal invitation. And I don't know if this has anything to do with your question, Alexis. Does it?
I think so. I think we'll get there.
Okay, remind me what I'm supposed to be answering.
What is your process?
My process.
Yes.
So as you can see, my process is a little different for the things I write for myself. My journal pieces, they just are like, oh, in 3 days, I have this thing which makes sense to me and which I'm not going to really show anybody because it's a journal. If it becomes appropriate, if somebody talks about like how sad they are in October, I'll show them my song called October. And then sometimes also, in case you didn't notice, sometimes I'm funny. like, do you know who Gertrude Stein was?
I
She
don't.
was this poet in the early 20th century whose contribution to letters was that she wrote poems that are like, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose, or she was playing with words and repeating them. And she was very wealthy, which is why she could work in France without working. And she was very gay. And she and her partner, Alice Vitoglas, they had a succession of standard poodles, all of whom were named Biscuit. So my most recent song is in the voice of Biscuit. But he talks like Gertrude Stein. So he says, they call me Biscuit. No basket. He's like, in French, it's like it's a pomelier, it's the basket that they carry around French bread in.
Mm.
So they call her basket. And I love the song because it's hilarious. And then I have a song about a cat in heat. Come into the garden, Fred. The neighborhood tabby has gone. Come into the garden, Fred. I have nothing but my flea collar on. Nobody laughed. What is this?
I thought
That's
there was
funny.
more.
There
I
is
thought there
more.
was
The
more.
scent of catnip has gone to my head. I'll wait by the screen door till dawn. And it's a wonderful song, but it's really funny. And then I got a commission from, so you can see that those are commissioned by things that I find funny and charming and so on. But then I got a commission from the Humane Society of Fairbanks, Alaska, to write a song for their like anniversary party, a choral piece. And I thought, this is a piece about adopting a dog. So I made a dog chorus. It has people singing, and then it has like cues for the dog. You have to audition dogs for this because they have to be dogs that are willing to bark or howl, and they also have to be dogs that can make stop. But the horrible thing about this is after it was done there and not recorded, no one else will do it. Why will no one else do it? They are afraid of liability. Now, this is New York City, where in this season, in Christmas season, many, many, many churches bless the animals. Thousands, literally hundreds and thousands of people come to church with their animals. We're talking not just dogs and cats, which there are many of, but chickens and guinea pigs and parrots and parakeets and turtles, and nothing bad happens. You know, I wrote this piece with the dogs in mind because I live in a city in which dogs know each other. There is almost no dog aggression in New York City because when you walk a dog in New York, you're going to meet 20 other dogs before you go home. So you can't have dog aggressive dogs here. So it never occurred to me there would be a liability problem. So sometimes I get my inspiration gets screwed up in my process.
Mm.
I'm a very melodic composer, which is not a popular thing. So very often the musical material I start with is a melody of some kind. And I don't know what else to tell you. Alexis, can you give me some guidance as what you would like me to discuss with this talk?
I guess, I mean, I feel like you kind of touched on it even with Kimberly's question also, but I guess I was just trying to get an understanding of how or I guess like it starts with what you're inspired by with a certain piece, right? And then how that inspiration, or what story you want to tell with a certain piece, and just how it comes about, I guess, maybe for you. But you did pretty much touch on all of that.
Okay, give me another question then.
Okay, so my last question is,
Oh no.
do you have a piece of yours that is your favorite? or one of your favorite pieces, and why that piece might be your favorite.
I really love my second string quartet. And the reason why I love my second string quartet, I'm going to tell you this whole long story. You can find all of these pieces on my website to listen to, and I would recommend that. So I was at a different artist colony, and someone, a poet whom I like and know for many years, was telling this story about her teacher, who was named William Stafford, a poet I strongly recommend to all of you. And every morning, he lived in the Midwest, in like your typical Midwestern wood house and a field. I mean, I don't live like that. I don't think you Californians live like that either. But he was a very Midwestern poet, a wonderful poet. And he would, before breakfast every day, I love the story. Before breakfast every day, he would go upstairs to the attic and write for a while. And then he would come down and have coffee and breakfast with his wife. And one day he did that. And he came down and he read her this poem that he had just written for her. Let me try to find it. I hate doing this to you again. Let me try to find this thing. Oh, I might be able to find it easily. It's possible. Oh, it's not in here. Let's try finished things. I'll be right back. Where is this? It's the Night Watch. What the hell is this? It's missing from here. It's like maybe. Oh, it's no. I have no idea where this is gone because this is like a very important work. Let me look in a different place. Yeah. All right. I think I can find a poem here. All right. Let me read you this poem if I can find it here. Open, open, open. I have no idea why my computer is doing this weird thing. All right, I think I found it. You will never, this is the poem he read to her that morning. You will never be alone. You hear too deep a sound when autumn comes. Yellow pulls across the hills and thrums like silence after lightning before it says its names. You were aimed for birth, you will never be alone. Rain will come, a gutter filled, an Amazon, long aisles. You never heard so deep a sound, moss on rock and years. That's what the silence meant. You're not alone. The whole wide world pours down. And you can hear that song based on that on my website. Now, at the time, this was very important to me. Oh, and then he died right there at the table. He wrote him this poem saying, you will never be alone, and he died. He was an old man, but still. And it's an amazing thing to do that just before you died. And this woman, we're back to the artist colony where I heard this poem. At the time that she read this and told the story, my husband had just died, like a few months before. And I love this poem because, again, remember I said music can tell you opposite things at the same time? The poem is about being alone. The song, I mean, there's almost no sound behind the singer in the song. Because it's about being alone, and it's also, you will never be alone, he keeps saying. And I like that. I like the juxtaposition of the two things because they're both true.
Mhm.
And they're both simultaneously true. And to make that happen in music is very interesting to me and very engaging to me. So I wrote that song and I liked the song a lot. So I kept working with the melody in the song. I was very interested and I did lots of things with it. This is like how artists write a series. And out of that melody came a full-length ballet, came like a string quartet, which is, as I mentioned, one of my favorite pieces, an orchestra piece, and that song in a song cycle. So sometimes I have material that like, it needs more. You know, this is a lovely song. I really like the song very, very much. That song is also on YouTube. It's called Assurance, if you want to look at it. But sometimes it can do more things, that material. So does that answer that question?
Yes, yes, it does. And I like that story also.
That story is very touching to me. Is there anything else you want to ask me? I have time. I'm loving this. I don't hear you.
I think my final question for you would be, are there any composers that you wish to work with today?
I don't work with composers. I am a composer. What do you mean by work with composers?
As in, like, would you want to collaborate with other artists together to create a piece?
Other artists, yes. At the moment, I'm writing a piece for Opera America, and my wonderful librettist is what's her name? Alejandra Martinez. It's an opera in Spanish, and she's very young. I mean, she's a little older than you probably, but she's a lot younger than me, and she's just brilliant. I mean, she sort of reads my mind about what I want. She's just, and she has the same. To collaborate with someone, you have to have a similar vision. You'll complement each other's vision. It's not exactly the same, or it'd be like working alone, but you have to be able to really get what the other one's vision is. And there are things she's put into this opera that I would never have dreamed of that are like perfect, just perfect. How do you think of that, Ale? You know? So yes, I have a wonderful librettist. I have, I'm talking to a woman about writing her viola concerto. I hope it happens. She's a very strange person, but I would like to work with her and write her a viola concerto. What else? I work with a lot of instrumentalists and singers, because once you have somebody who has your kind of vision, like there's this singer that's tenor. I love working with him. I think he's a miracle. He comes from Detroit. He's like the 11th of 12 children, and he has a voice to die for. It's so beautiful. Like once we were making this recording, and he said to me, do you have anything to suggest? Because when you make a recording, you record things over and over, and because, you know, this isn't exactly how you want. And I said to him, what was the truth? Which is, the trouble with working with you is your voice is so beautiful that I can't concentrate on anything else. And this is a guy who does everything, everything. He's great at contemporary music. He's great at regular standard repertoire. He does a huge amount of jazz. He's on Broadway. He traveled with the Lion King. I mean, he does everything, and everything he does he's really a miracle. So yes, but he's hard to, the reason why he's hard to collaborate with is because he's on the road all the time. But yes, there are people I love collaborating with. And does anyone else have more questions? Alexis, you look like you're hatching something.
No, no, that was it for me.
Kimberlyn?
That was it for me too.
Anaya?
Got through everyone's questions then.
Wow, those are great questions. Thank you so much. It's been a joy. If you would like to send me this and send me papers on it, I would love to see your reaction to things.
Of course. Thank you so much for letting us interview you today.
Yes,
It's
thank you
been
so
a
much for your time.
Thank you so much for being interested. Oh, I have one more question.
Of course.
How did you find me?
Well, our professor sort of gave us a full, what is it called? Like a full sheet of different composers and sort of artists. And we just decided to pick whichever one interested us the most?
And what made you interested in me?
Just the variety that you had on your
I
page.
see. I see, okay.
There's so many
So it
different.
wasn't just the name, it was something about the variety of the work and so on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad you chose me. It's a delight to know you. If there's anything I can do for any of you or all of you, but any of you individually, don't hesitate to contact me.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
you.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, ladies. Bye-bye.